And there are some sessions coming up on that later this week and next week. There's the assignments tool, which is what we're talking about today. And the assignments tool is most useful for things like individual essays, reports, case studies, audio, visual, sort of PDF documents, those kinds of items, and can be used either individually or for group submissions. And then there's the forums tool. The assignments tool is unique in comparison to the other two in terms of the fact that it links to the Turnitin Similarity program or plagiarism checker in inverted commas. So unlike tests and quizzes and forums, you can link Turnitin to your assignments to get a sense of how much of a student's assignment is similar to what already exists in other spheres, like on the internet, in various databases, in other students' writing and so on. Okay, so that's where this assignments tool kind of fits into the bigger picture. So the assignments tool is the tool that's obviously most commonly used for written assignments. As I've indicated, it accepts multiple types of files. A useful thing to say to your students is they should not be typing their assignments up in the assignments tool. There is an option in the assignments tool for students to actually actively type into the assignments tool itself. Our best advice is that that is incredibly dangerous, because if, for example, a session unexpectedly ends, they have a power cut, or their device crashes, or their internet's interrupted for some reason, they're going to lose that work. So a good piece of general advice is to make sure that students prepare their assignment somewhere else, like a Word document, a Google document, or whatever it is, and then upload a file for you. That also means that should something go wrong, your students will always have a backup copy of their own. So I would put that into any kind of assignment brief that I gave a student. Make sure that you have a Word copy, upload that file. Okay, so the assignments tool is a tool that needs to be added to your basic Vula site. Your basic Vula site will be very skinny. Usually it's a site that comes with, it's a very lean site structure. It'll usually have an overview, and then when you start, you're asked what tools you want to add, and most initial setups will add assignments. However, if you have inherited a Vula site that doesn't have an assignments tool added, which you can see in the left-hand sort of menu, then what you would need to do is to go to Site Setup, click on Manage Tools, and add assignments. Okay, it's not, it is a fairly straightforward procedure. However, if you have any challenges with it at all, please feel free to contact the help desk. If you've been added to the site as a lecturer rather than as a site owner or a site support staff, you will actually struggle to add any tools. So please, if you've been added to a site as a lecturer rather than one of the other two categories, you will need to ask your site administrator or site owner to edit your classification, your role on the site, before you can add tools like assignments or lecture videos or the chat room or anything like that. Okay, I did say earlier, please feel free to interrupt. So again, just to reiterate, feel free to interrupt. So one of the challenges with the assignments tool is that there's quite a lot that you need to do in order to make maximum use of the assignments tool. So in there are two tools that link to it very nicely, the Gradebook Tool and the Rubrics Tool, and there are upcoming webinars on both of those. It's best to set up both the Gradebooks Tool and the Rubrics Tool quite early in the semester. So at this point in the semester, really people are probably focusing just on the assignments tool. And each of those bullet points that you see in front of you are choices that you will need to make in setting up the assignment. So speaking for a second directly to anyone who is administrative support. Before you set up the assignment, these are things that your lecturers will need to be able to tell you in terms of what you should preset the assignment to do. And we're going to walk through each of these items in a second. Okay, as an academic, if you're setting up an assignment for your own course, you are going to need to have made a decision about each of those things. If you are going to hand setting up the assignment to someone in your department, a senior tutor, a TA, administrative staff, you're still going to have needed to have made these decisions, and then you just pass that on to them. Alvin, yes, we will make the slides available, and we're recording today, so we'll make both of those available. We'll email links to you. Thank you so much for the question. Okay, we'll probably also attach each of this slide as a little checklist so that you can kind of work your way through it when you're setting up assignments. Okay, so one of the things that you need to be very clear about is assignment instructions. Usually lecturers have like an assignment brief that they share with their students, and that is something that's very useful to actually copy into this space. If you don't copy it into the space, information that students might need to be prompted about, such as attachments or particular things to be cautious about, may kind of slip them by in the final hand-in. So it's really useful to make sure that you add that to the assignment instructions. You can also add that as an attachment if you don't want to copy and paste the text into this space. Another aspect that we often get a question about is the honor pledge. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pop out of my screen share quickly, and I'm just going to nip into Vula and show you. So you should be able to see a Vula site. I'm going to walk through the assignments tool with you on a Vula site. So this is just a sandbox site. If you want somewhere to play and to test things, then please let me know. You are very, very welcome to have a look at this site. And that is a place that you can just kind of, and I'll add you to it and you can play on the site. Okay, so the assignments tool is there. I've clicked on it. Let's say that I want to add an assignment. I would click here. I would need to give my assignment a title. So let's call this workshop trial. Okay, I would need to, as I said, add the instructions. And I would need to make a decision about whether or not I was going to tick this box that said honor pledge. The honor pledge at UCT is a plagiarism declaration. I would strongly recommend that you add it. It's not the most, it's the institutional plagiarism declaration. So at this point, there isn't space. At this point, there isn't really space for people to edit that. If anyone wants to, you're welcome to add me to the, you're welcome to just text me and say, I want to be added to the site, and I'll add you after the session. If you don't want to add assignment instructions here, you can add an attachment. Okay, so the next little step that people would need to follow is you would need to make a whole group of decisions about availability. So you would need to decide when your assignment was open, in other words, when it was visible to students. I'm going to set that as today, and we're going to make it 11:15. You can play with the little time sliders. So there's a really useful question from the text chat, which is, how effective is the honor pledge? I'm happy to respond to that, but I wonder if anyone from the group would like to. Just bear in mind that we are recording this session. You're more than welcome to also type a response in the text chat if you want to say something but not have your voice identifiable. Is there anyone who wants to speak about that? Okay, please feel free to type into the text chat if you do. Otherwise, also feel free to just unmute your mic and jump in. I think that honor pledges are variably effective. For some students, they are incredibly effective. I think the bigger issue is around risk and pressure. So if students are facing what feels to them untenable pressure and substantial risk, I'm going to be blunt for a second here, lying about whether or not they have received excessive help is not going to be high on anybody's list. So when I talk about excessive pressure, for example, we've worked with departments where every single course's work becomes available at the same time and is due at the same time. So a student will have 4 substantial pieces of work all due in the same week. That's substantial pressure, particularly because it's not always clear to students how they can make progress towards a task well in advance. The other thing is about risk. If students are feeling that there is no opportunity to recover from getting something wrong, then that is substantial risk. And depending on other factors in their lives and in their life worlds, they may well choose to not be 100% honest with us, or to behave in ways that give them the best chance of appearing to succeed. So the honor pledge is something that the university asks for. It's a very widely used practice. I believe that it's the structures around our assessment practices that are most likely to help our students to behave honorably, and to be honest about their submissions, than necessarily ticking an honor pledge. I don't know if that answers your question. I'm not going to say your name because it's a text question, and so we said that we wouldn't name folks who ask questions in the text. Okay, if it doesn't answer your question, please feel free to come back to me in the text chat, and I will try and do a little better. Okay, so we were chatting about this availability section, and in terms of availability, you have the option to set an open date. You have the option to set a due date. So this is by when students obviously must have handed in. And then you have the option to set an accept until date. This accept until date is not visible to students. I set this date very, very far from my due date, very late after my due date. I set it that way because otherwise, for every single late hand-in that I end up accepting, I have to go and reset this date. So if, for example, I had a due date of the 27th of October, in the current context with all the chaos that we have going on, I would probably set this accept until date for at least 2 weeks and probably even 3 weeks later. I might even set it till the end of semester to give myself the most flexibility, because students will, in the current context, come to us with very legitimate reasons for delay that we will need to honor and to work with. Okay, there are a couple of other ideas here or questions here in relation to availability that you'll need to address. Do you want to send students a reminder 24 hours before the due date? You can. I feel like for the most part, unless these are short sort of 300-word pieces, sending people a reminder 24 hours before is probably not terribly helpful. It might be a gentle nudge. I would set this to happen, but I would also do an announcement. You can hide the due date from students. I have no idea why anyone would want to do that, but you could. You can add the due date to the calendar. I think that's really useful. and you can add an announcement about the open date to announcements. I generally don't do this because I like to send a once weekly or twice weekly announcement with all the stuff that's going on that week. And I find that getting lots of little announcements from Vula is annoying. So that would be my suggestion there. I'm going to pause for a second. Has anyone got any questions? Please feel free to ask your questions either by text or to turn on your mic and ask them with your voice. Just remember, we are recording. Okay, so up until that point, I think we're still in the land of like, this is all logical. It starts to get a little bit more complicated shortly. You can, at this point also, you have an option to assign an assignment to either individual members of a class, individual members of a selected group, or to a whole selected group. Now you'll see that over here, I cannot tick. So we've got a colleague with a useful text question. Can students see the assignment before the open date? No. So you can pre-prep your assignments in advance, edit them just before you make them open, and then make them open. You'll also see at the bottom here, there's an opportunity to save a draft. So you can always save your assignments in draft form before making them available to students. If you post them, they will be visible but not open. Okay, so just to clarify that, because I think I did not express that well. If you post an assignment, students will be able to see it, but they won't be able to submit until the assignment date. If you're using the assignment tab in the exam setup, what does visible mean? I think if I was going to set up an exam in the assignments tab, I would save it, I wouldn't post it. So posting it makes it viewable to students, right? Saving it makes it not viewable. I hear a mic. That means possibly a clarifying question. Yes?
I am running 3 exams simultaneously on the same date at the same time for 3 different courses. And my exams are split up between short questions that are run through the test and quizzes tab, and then essay kind of questions that I'm running through the assignment tab. So I'm quite anxious about that morning and how that's going to go. If I have to be online on standby, like 30 seconds to go, and then to go make certain things live, like very, very last minute, and not being able to do that beforehand.
Okay.
Do you have any advice?
So that sounds like a really horrible scenario where you have multiple exams visible or becoming visible at the same time. I'm going to ask that we put a pin in that one and that I come back to you straight after this session and that we figure out how to do that safely for you. I would also strongly suggest that we have backup plans for that. You know, there's a backup person. So my great fear at the moment is like my computer explodes. You know, and then I can't make anything, I can do nothing. So at the moment, we kind of have like backups and double backups for everything, you know, something, or the internet cable in your area goes down or whatever it is. So I'm going to just make a note of that in terms of using the assignments tab for an exam and making it visible.
Okay. Thank you.
And I'm going to come back to you and the group after this meeting. And what we'll do is I'll just send that information by email so that if that's anybody else's query, they can see it as well. Okay. Thank you so much. I'm not naming names only because I don't want to like say people's names because we're recording. Okay. So thank you very much for that question. That's a really useful question. So for anybody who's thinking about group work in relation to assignments, you have to set up the groups in advance using the group tool. And then this little assign to section becomes very important. Okay. If you have any concerns about setting up the groups tool and linking it to an assignment, may I strongly recommend that you book an online consultation at your convenience with one of our consultants, and they will sit with you and go through it on your screen with you and make sure that the setup is correct. They're really friendly people. So that assign to groups thing, if you're setting up a group assignment, this is the thing you need to worry about. Okay, so now let's talk about this little section here on submissions and submission types. So this student submission section over here. So the first thing you want to decide here is, how are my students submitting? My strongest recommendation to you is, say to your students, attachments only. Okay, making them type things in Vula, as I said earlier, really dangerous, because it's entirely possible that they'll have a power outage, the internet will go down at some point, it'll cause them a problem. So I would strongly recommend that you ask your students to do attachments only. Most people use inline and attachments, but it is risky to ask people to do inline work. So I would always go with attachments. You can decide whether or not you want to allow your students resubmission. The minute I click the resubmission button, a bunch of options opens for me. If you are using this if you are using the assignments tool in relation to some kind of flexibly timed exam, i.e. the exam question is released at a particular time and students have 6 to 8 hours or 2 to 4 hours or whatever it is in that time period to complete something and submit it, then you probably don't want to allow multiple resubmissions. However, many people are opting for take-home exams. Many people are opting for kind of open book exams. And in that case, you may want to allow resubmission. Certainly, if you're using a kind of conventional essay format, it is a very good idea to encourage your students to submit a couple of days early, allow them a resubmission, and pair that with the Turnitin option that we're going to talk about in 1 second. Okay, I never set my resubmission date after my due date. So set your resubmission date to coincide, to actually be the same as your due date. You don't want it to be later than that. Otherwise, you'll have students submitting things after the due date, and that causes you problems. There's an option here around releasing the resubmission notification. I think that if you want students to resubmit, it's probably a great idea to send them a resubmission email immediately, rather than waiting for you to finish the whole batch, or yeah, so just be careful around that resubmission. Do you want them to receive an email or not? Some people like to batch it and do it all at the end. Some people like to do it as they go. That's a personal choice. You can choose to receive emails. The submission notification email options speaks to whether or not you receive an email for every single student submission. I would strongly advise that you click either do not send notification emails or send 1 email a day. I think that it makes no sense at all to receive a notification email for each student submission. This is particularly true if you have large classes. Otherwise, you'll land up with 80, 100, 1,500 emails in your mailbox saying, I have received ECO's 110 or 120 or whatever it is, student submission. And you'll get that for every single student who submits. So I would strongly recommend do not send notification emails. There's a question in the text chat: who on the site gets a notification of submission? The person who, all your site owners will get notification of submission. The lecturer role on Vula is a very constrained role. The lecturer role is a little bit like, think of if you had a guest lecturer, that is the that's the kind of role that Vula imagines. So if you add somebody to your site as a lecturer, they can do very little. They can enter the site, they can see things, but they can't add tools, they can't add lessons pages. I think they can add things to resources, but that's about it. I would strongly suggest that anybody who's actively fully teaching on your site is either a site owner or a site support staff. And then another question in the text chat, is only the most recent submission captured? Yes, so it overwrites submissions. Some people prefer not to do that, so they'll have a draft assignment, and then they'll set up an additional assignment option, which is their final assignment. So if you want to keep a record of when my students submitted their drafts, this is what they did, you can set up a draft assignment for them, and you can then add the final assignment as well, and that will keep a record of both of those things. Okay, so we've talked about the submission notification options. Please feel free to keep text chatting or to ask questions out loud, and I will try and answer them. If I don't answer them, please feel free to just let me know in the text chat, and I'll have a second shot.
Sonali?
So, yes?
Can I just ask a question?
Of course.
So if somebody asks you for an extension, right, to hand in later
Yes.
than the due date,
Yes.
and you have to alter the dates, would you have to alter that resubmission accept until date as well?
That would be a decision that usually an academic would make or an administrator would make as a kind of blanket decision for the course. So I must admit, this is where I get a little bit hardcore. I will give my students an extension on their final piece, but very often I don't give them the resubmit and feedback option at that point. Like if you're already submitting 3 weeks after the due date, then I'm probably under pressure to get you your feedback in a meaningful time. And so I am unlikely to allow you resubmissions. So what I would probably do is I would keep this accept until date as open as I could, so that I didn't have to adjust anything here, because your accept until date will accept even if the due date has passed. And I'm not likely to allow resubmissions after that date. If your course decides to be super generous, and it may, like there may be courses where there aren't the same pressures, then what you can do is you can set your resubmission accept to the same date as your accept until. And that will mean that anybody who submits late can also resubmit. I think that creates some opportunity for a little bit of like confusion and chaos. But if people feel strongly about the feedback or about students getting a Turnitin report and then adjusting their work accordingly, then you might indeed want to set this resubmission date to match your accept until date. Okay, I hope that answers your question. If it doesn't, just pop me a message and I'll come back to it. Okay, so let's talk about Turnitin. Turnitin markets itself as a plagiarism service, as a plagiarism checking service. I just want to first of all start with a little caveat. It is in fact a matching service. So what Turnitin does is it takes what your student has submitted and it compares it to everything that Turnitin has access to in its databases. The Turnitin databases include crudely access to various journal databases, access to various student university databases, and to the kind of broader open internet. And so what it will do is it will scrape that and it will just match. So for example, if I don't enable a setting that I'm going to show you at the moment, my students will have plagiarism highlights every single time they say teaching and learning. And that's a problem. Like that's just a waste of their time, their concern, my energies, etc. So if you click use Turnitin, just be aware that there are a bunch of choices that you still need to make after that. The first one is, do you allow students to view the report? I believe my students should see their reports because I want them to know if they have a problem and I want them to fix their problem, preferably. So for me, I always give a resubmission option and allow students to view reports. Then it would not be helpful to submit papers to no repository. That isn't a great plan. So please leave this as a preset. Submit to the following standard paper repository. And this is where you get to make a choice. Generate originality reports on immediately when the student submits it or on the due date. Their immediately is a little bit misleading. It can take up to 24 hours for a Turnitin report to come back to a student and back to the Vula site. Okay, I always tick immediately. If I'm going to get my students to see their Turnitin report, I probably want them to fix something, and then waiting until the due date for them to see that is too late. If on the other hand, and this is, different disciplines function differently. If on the other hand, you don't want to give your students the option to edit their document, but you do want them to know that they have this is what their similarity report looks like, or their originality report, you can click on the due date. And then on the due date, all of your students will receive their originality reports. I go with the immediately option. Okay, so you can make some choices here about exclusion. So you can exclude bibliographic materials. I think that's always a good idea. You can exclude quoted materials. Again, a good idea if something's correctly quoted, inverted commas, has a citation. We shouldn't really freak out about it too much. I like to exclude small matches, phrases like teaching and learning, social justice and higher education. So I will tell it usually to exclude up to a word count of, I normally tell it 3. I don't do the percentage. I haven't figured out what seems like a reasonable percentage yet. So you can tell it to, like, if you know that there are phrases that just come up all the time in your discipline, you can say to it, ignore 3 to 5 words or whatever it is. This is where you can confirm what you want it checked against. So in this, the default settings are usually the best option. You can leave it there. If you are using, if you're grading online, you're going to need to think about grading. I'm going to pause there quickly. Are there any questions about the kind of Turnitin bit? Because that's often there are often lots of questions about that. Any questions about Turnitin? So just be aware that assignments is the only tool in Vula that links to Turnitin. So if your exam or if your test, your assignment, you want to be able to compare students' work to each other's, students' work broadly. So in your cohort or in your class, then you have to use the assignments tool. You can't do something similar in the short answer question in tests and quizzes there. Okay, no questions on Turnitin. I'm going to move on. Please feel free to add any questions if you need to. So there's a little section on grading that will again open up. So the first thing is to hide submitters' identities, i.e. do you want to know which student it is? Some people say no, they don't. Some people are like, I'm fine with knowing. And then it has a question about grading this assignment. And when you click on the grade this assignment, i.e. grade it online, it will ask you a whole lot of questions. The first question is, are you using points, a letter grade, pass or fail, or a check mark? Most people are using a point system. So students will receive a mark out of 20, out of 50, out of 100, even if what's being recorded on their transcript at the end of the semester is a pass or fail. Okay, so we've been encouraged across the institution to continue to grade assignments, but then to convert those to a pass or fail when it goes into PeopleSoft. This little option here for max points tells you what gives you a bit of space to type in what it is that you want. So this could be out of any number that you chose. So you could make it out of 10 if it was a short piece. You could make it out of 50. You could make it out of 100, up to you. The only reason that is significant is that if you're going to use the rubrics tool, And there is a workshop, a seminar on that, I believe next week. If you're going to use the rubrics tool, it's very important that your points over here matches the rubrics tool, matches the points on your rubrics. Okay, so for now, we're going to say do not use a rubric to mark this assignment. If we were, we'd have a bunch more options open to us, but for now, let's go with do not. And then you can choose, are you sending grades to Gradebook? Are you using peer assessment? Okay. Peer assessment is risky. In the current context, our students are really pressured. They're not doing a great job of talking to each other. In a summative task, you're unlikely to be using peer assessment. If you are using peer assessment, that's fine, but I would consider perhaps using something slightly outside Vula for that. It's a little bit, it doesn't really allow you to control it enough, I think, within the Vula context. If you want to, if you've set up Gradebook, you can send grades to Gradebook, and that opens up a whole bunch of options. If you are going to use Gradebook for your exam, please be in touch with us, book a consult with one of our consultants, and we will make sure that you get individual support for that. It can be slightly tricky. Okay, and that will set up your assignments tool. You need to just make a couple of last choices here. Do you release grade notifications? Do you want to release it immediately when it's graded? Or do you want to wait and release the batch? Generally, I don't send notification emails to students when the grade is released, i.e. when I've entered it onto Vula. I let them all know when I've done all of it. And then you would click post. You can also preview it. You can save the draft. So let's see what that looks like. If I preview, that'll just give me a little sense. I see a question in the text chat. I'm going to come to it at the moment, or in a moment. It'll give you a little preview of what's going on. You can either edit or save draft. I'm just going to save draft for now because I don't want to annoy everybody on this site by sending them an email by mistake. Okay, so there it is. So the question was, can we go back to rubrics? So I'm just going to go rather to, a slightly different place on rubrics. Before I take the rubrics question, are there any other questions that we need to answer about what we've talked about so far? There's a question in the text chat. I have an assignment that includes a group mark and an individual mark and want them to upload one doc as a group. How does that work with the link to Gradebook? So I think that that's going to be a tricky one. I would be tempted to say that we want to, that is an interesting one. Let's talk about that a little bit more. I need some more information about that before I can make a recommendation. So I think we're going to need to just make an appointment to chat about that one. I need to understand the assignment better to answer that question. Okay, so let's talk about these rubrics and then marking online, because clearly that's something that folks want to chat about. So I'm going to go to, so this is a fake assignment list on a fake site. But what I have done with these items here is that you'll see anything that has a little table next to it like this uses the rubrics tool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and show you just briefly how to grade online if you are using the rubrics tool. Okay, so I'm just going to go to a random one over here that I made up a while ago. And I'm going to click on the grade button. And I stole somebody's random text. So if you're marking, one of the things that you will be able to see is you'll have a list of student submissions. And this is, I'd enable Turn-It in here, and you'll see there's this alarming red flag and this 99% number. Terrifying as hell. I'm going to show you two things now. I'm going to show you what it looks like to grade in the rubrics tool, and I'm going to show you briefly what it looks like to grade and turn it in. That's a choice you can make. You can choose either the rubrics tool, which lives inside the Vula environment and won't cost your students any data at the moment. If you use the Turnitin tool, it will cost your students a bit of data to access it. It will also obviously cost you data because it's not zero rated. So if I go and click on this grade item over here, what you'll see is that we've got, in this case, I've already graded it, but let's go click on the student's name. Double click, sorry. And this is what pops up. So if I was a tutor or a lecturer and I was grading, this is what I would see. This is the student's submission over here. If I wanted to download it, I could click on this link over here, download it, mark it offline, and then add it back as an attachment. In this case, we've set up a little rubric. So I'm going to go and click on the rubric. And you'll see that it's a very basic rubric, okay? It's got 4 kind of criteria. It's got some points, something that was built in the Rubrics tool. The Rubrics tool, if you set it up correctly, will give you the opportunity to edit the points. So if I click 30 here, it'll tell me it's somewhere between 30 and 40, and I could make it 35. If I clicked there, it would tell me it's somewhere above 15 and under 20. So I would go something like that. If I clicked there, again, it would say to me, maximum of 10, minimum of 10 points. Maybe the person's really close to a 12. And if I click there, it would say, oh, minimum of 7. And I could go, okay, actually really an 8. And if I decided I was okay with this, I would click the done button down here. Okay, and that would pop the grade in there. I could go back and edit this. Okay, I could add an attachment as feedback. If I wanted to add a little bit more information, so if I downloaded this and marked specific comments on it, and I could, if I wanted, if I clicked on feedback comment, I could give the student a more general comment here. Okay, and then I have some options. I can save it, or I can save and release the student, or I can allow a resubmission. All right, so if I clicked allow resubmission, then I would say how many of them and when they could resubmit until. And this would override any generic resubmission details. I could also save it and release it to my student immediately, or I could just click save, entirely up to you. For now, I'm just going to click save though. Some people kind of mark as they go, I don't, it stresses me out. A little glitch in the system, it doesn't take you back to the list. So you click save and then you go return to list. And you'll see the person has a little grade there. So that's option 1 for grading. Option 2 for grading in the assignments tool. What is the private notes for? Is it different from feedback? It is indeed. Let me go back to that. So private notes are for notes among markers. So if you wanted to moderate marks, this would be where you would put them, into the private notes. Okay, so if a course convener went through and moderated it and they wanted to say to a tutor, listen, I think you were not generous enough here, or you were a little too generous, or please check this section, they could do that there. What this doesn't do is it doesn't email that tutor directly. So I would be more likely to do that offline. You'll pop someone an email and go, hey, please go back and review your marking for Paul's work. Okay, so let's go back to our list because I briefly want to show you the alternative marking space. So as I said, the rubric space lives in Vula. It's fully under your control. It's 0 rated for your students, which is kind of nice. The alternative space is to actually mark in Turnitin itself, which has a great deal of functionality, but also a learning curve. So you double click on the flag, and that takes you into the Turnitin marking grading suite. Okay, you'll see your students' details up there. And I guess the thing that most people are often interested in is actually this little red button, which is your Similarity Tools. And if I open up my Similarity Tools, what I can see is things like, uh-oh, there's a 99% match, and it's because it's actually all come from somewhere else. And if I hover over that, it'll tell me where it comes from, okay? And it comes from just a rough draft that Paul put onto the internet. Kindly, bless his heart. Now, one of the other things that you can use in the Turnitin suite is this blue stuff up here. These little blue icons are actually marking icons. So if I click on quick marks, it brings up a list of comments that come from a particular list that I've made called, or that Turnitin has called Spotlighting Strengths, okay? And it has a list of different comments that you can make. You can also change which list you're using by clicking on that little gear over there. And so instead of using the spotlighting ones, you can use alternatives, okay? So you can create a new set of your own. You can pull one of the sets from here and use those. Okay, I'm gonna close that for now. All right, so there are these quick marks, which are useful, but it means you've got to do some work in advance to figure out, well, what are my like most used comments? I find it very useful to do these at the draft stage. I don't do these at the summative stage. So at the draft stage, we do a lot of like formative feedback, and I would use these quick marks very happily for that. The other thing Turnitin allows is a short 3-minute voice comment. And generally, there's a lot of positive feedback, both from students and in the literature around voice comments. So hearing your lecturer's voice and knowing they're talking to you is apparently wildly comforting. And apparently all of us are more approachable often in voice than we are in text. So this can be a useful thing that a student would receive. You can also write a text comment to them. And then Turnitin has a built-in rubric. So they have a group of rubrics. Again, you can select from the rubric library. These are all just things that people have shared with Turnitin, or you can create a new rubric, okay? And that would be up to you. You can also create a grading form, which is a little bit different from a rubric, but not wildly. If you're not using Turnitin to mark, can you also add voice notes to a Word doc and upload that as an attachment? So far as I'm aware, at the moment, you can't add voice notes to a Word doc. What I do with my voice notes is I record them in other spaces. If you can add voice notes to a Word doc, then we must test that. And we can test that happily in the Sandpit site. So I think let's give that a test run and just make sure that the whole of the attachments, all of the different modes of attachment work as well. But I do think the voice notes are definitely something that are incredibly useful and really important in this kind of distanced moment. Okay, so again, it has a fair amount of functionality. However, there are learning curves here, and I would not use these for final exam type scenarios. I would probably go to the effort of Turnitin for a midterm paper or for a paper that my student was going to actively learn from. I probably wouldn't do a great deal in a final exam type scenario. Okay, it is 4 minutes to the hour. So I'm going to stop sharing for a second there and stop speaking and just say, please remember we are on record and you're very welcome to ask either with your voice or on text. But do you have any questions? Any last questions? Just a couple of things I want to emphasize. These webinars are very much designed as a kind of opportunity to just kind of become aware of what are all the Thank you so much. If you have to run, please feel free to do that. So the webinars are very much just becoming aware of what the kind of functionality is. When it comes to setting up individual courses, assignments, assessments, etc., we are very open to just checking in with you one-on-one and going, is this working or isn't it? And the way to do that is by booking a consultation. What we will do when we send the recording from this and the slides is we will also send you a link to how you can book a one-on-one consultation. So just be aware that if you're sitting there and going, oh, I really want this and this and this, but I'm not quite sure how to put these puzzle pieces together, a one-on-one consult will be the best way to make sure that we put it together in the right way for your course. I see one more question that I want to, or two more questions I want to respond to. The first question is about linking assignments to Gradebook. Yes, sadly, Gradebook is one of those fairly complex tools. We can either address Gradebook in a consultation, or there is a Gradebook webinar that we run that you're very welcome to attend. So if you would like to, if you'd like to just be in touch about Gradebook, please feel free to do that. There's a question about contacting SILT. So you can either contact SILT, you can contact SILT in a number of ways. If you would like to I think perhaps the easiest thing to do is actually just to pop me an email as a starting point, and I'll direct you to the right person for a query. But otherwise, you can find us on the SILT website, so silt.uct.ac.za. We have a lot going on at the moment. So if you have a specific query, please feel free to pop an email either to me or to silt@uct.ac.za. If you have a specific query about Vula, you are also very welcome to contact the Vula help desk. But if you're kind of in the setting up thinking stage, then it's better to book a one-on-one consult. If there's anybody that I've had a conversation with today who has a query that we need to follow up on, please pop me an email so I don't lose track of your query, and we will find your next step forward. So there've been a couple of people that I've said, let's explore that further. Please email me so I don't lose track of you. Okay, so ways of contacting us, www.silt.uct.ac.za, silt@uct.ac.za for emails. If you go to the website and you're like, oh, so much stuff, then please email me directly and I will put you in touch directly with the right person. Okay, colleagues, it's 11:55 and I'm sure you all need a breather. Good luck with assignments and good luck with the end of year exams. I know that there's a lot going on. Please, please, please feel free to book one-on-one consults on the SILT's website. We are so happy to support you directly and make sure that your process goes smoothly. Okay, so thanks very much, folks. I'm going to say have a lovely, lovely day. We will be closing the room shortly. If there are any other questions, please feel free to pop them into the text chat. If you are new to Vula, please feel free to also just reach out. Diving into assessments is like, you know, the deep end of the pool. So if you're new to Vula, new to UCT, please feel free to just pop us an email and we can have a chat and help you find your feet a bit. All right, thank you, lovely, lovely, lovely humans. I wish you lots of strength for the stuff ahead. And yeah, the room's gonna close in a minute or two. But take care and look after yourselves and your loved ones, and we will see you all soon. Okay, room's closing shortly. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Be safe. Bye, thank you.